Welcome back to the Reno-Tahoe Real Estate Insider podcast. That's a lot to say, but today we are joined by Sabrina Belleci, now the founder and owner broker of Casa Tua. She's got over 250 million in lifetime sales, is one of the top agents under 40 in this part of the United States. Third generation realtor, correct?
Correct, yes.
And is extremely knowledgeable about all things from the agent side, the minutia on the agent side, all the way up to everything you need to know about being a broker and an owner. So Sabrina, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was quite the intro. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to talk about buyer-broker agreements and what a buyer needs to know about a buyer-broker agreement, how it adds value to them, the things to look out for potentially, and then also to the pros and cons of working directly with the listing agent. I know that's become more of a common practice for people nowadays. So yeah, let's hop right into it. How do you explain the real purpose of the buyer-broker agreement beyond it just being required paperwork for a buyer?
You know, there was that big lawsuit, right, which everyone kind of became aware of. So the laws changed in July, I think, of 2024, where we were required to have this piece of paperwork, which was a buyer's broker agreement. The intention was, I think, for transparency to the consumer, to the buyer. That was the goal. I don't think that goal has been achieved, but I think historically, there might have been some confusion on who was paying our compensation as a buyer's agent, right? Whether the seller was, going to pay it, or is it coming out of the buyer's expenses? And so the goal of the required paperwork, as you called it, of the buyer broker agreement was to essentially clear that up. And so historically, at least in practice here, we would have the listing agreement, and the listing agent would pre-negotiate a buyer's agent compensation within that listing agreement. So it basically said, hey, Mr. Seller, regardless of whatever offer you get, you're going to give the buyer's broker agreement or the buyer's broker, let's say 2%, 2.5%, 3%, right? Whatever that was. Now, in our listing agreements, depending on where you are, in our area, we have multiple forms, listing agreements. So now we're not required as a listing agent to guarantee that compensation to a buyer's broker. So now as a buyer's broker, when we first meet with clients, we basically have to pitch to them why they want to work with us specifically. And then we have them sign a form saying, here's our fee. So whether you buy a house now and whether you buy a $5 million house or whether you buy a $500,000 house, you're agreeing to pay us X amount of dollars, X percentage of whatever you buy. In practice, that agreement can either be exclusive, where the buyer signs solely with Sabrina Belleci and my team, and wherever I buy in Northern Nevada, we're going to go through you. Or you can have it as a non-exclusive agreement, which I think we're going to start seeing more now because of the Anywhere merger. But we can get into that. So you can either sign it with one agent or you can sign it with multiple agents, which it gets a little hairy, right? Then it becomes a non-exclusive. But at the end of the day, the goal of that contract is to say, hey, I'm a fiduciary to you as the buyer. And here's what I'm going to get paid. Whether, if the seller does not want to pay me when we negotiate a contract, then you're agreeing to pay me. And there's some nuances depending in practice with different brokerages and how I've seen brokers say, hey, if you're only charging your buyer 2% in that buyer broker agreement, you can't ask the seller for 3% when you're negotiating that, compensation. Or if the buyer has agreed to pay you, let's say a 3% at closing, seller wants to pay you 1%, you can't ask for the difference or you can't ask for the difference. So I've noticed every brokerage kind of deals with it a little bit differently. And we also have multiple different buyer brokers agreements. In Nevada, right? I know California has state contracts. Nevada, depending on which board you're with, it's a different contract. And in Nevada, you can write it on a napkin and it's an agreement.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the pros and cons to a buyer? Why is it helpful to a buyer? We'll touch on that first and then we'll get into
various reasons. I mean, I think, real estate is and has always been a relationship business. And so for me, I do a lot of work for my clients and my team does too, especially our buyer clients. It's rare that you have a buyer's agent that does the amount of work that we do to find the right property, especially in Incline Village in this area. We have so many properties that are kind of quietly listed, or they're not quite on the market yet, or, they're people's 10th home, right? And so for us, those people will sell at a make me move price, but they're not actively listed. So if you sign a buyer broker agreement with us and you're committing to work with us and you're going to compensate us for that, we go out there and we send, we cold call neighborhoods, we send out letters, because we work with our client to really figure out what works for them and what they're looking for, versus just kind of waiting for it to pop up on the MLS and on Zillow and then waiting for our client to call us.
That actually seems like it would be valuable to have the agreement, because then at the beginning, hey, they're working with you. So you don't have to worry about, hey, what if we do all this work and then all of a sudden they go and buy it with their cousin who happens to be an agent.
Yeah, who happened to just get licensed, right? So it's guaranteed for us knowing, hey, they're going to be our client. So we're putting in all this effort, time, energy, money to help them find the right property. And then they know and have some security with our presentation of, here's what we're going to do when you sign this contract with us. With the non-exclusive agreements versus the exclusive, that's also something to talk about as well, pros and cons of that.
Yeah, so break that down for me. What exactly is it?
So exclusively, let's say, you come to me, you hire me as your buyer's broker agent. We've been cold calling. We've been doing, tons of stuff to find you the right property, with showings, with networking with other agents, right? Mailers out to other prospective sellers in the neighborhood. And then all of a sudden you're at a bar and some guy next to you, is a real estate agent. And you start saying, oh, I'm working with Sabrina. And actually, like, I have this perfect house I want to, sell to you. Or I have this prospective listing. He can try to snake your client. It's very competitive. But also, once you sign that exclusive agreement, it allows us as an agent, most of the time our clients will call us. But the non-exclusive gives you opportunity within other brokerages. If you sign a non-exclusive with us and then you sign a non-exclusive with another company, you could have access to additional listings that are not necessarily on the market yet.
Because each company has access to
exclusive listings that are basically held in-house.
Got it.
Right. So
so if you have other agents that work under Casa Tua and they've got a listing coming online that you know about, that's something your client can have access to, versus if somebody over at the other brokerage had the same thing going on.
Correct.
Similar scenario.
Yeah. So if you have, if you sign multiple, non-exclusives, theoretically the consumer can work with multiple agents.
How do you determine who gets paid based on? So is it based on who showed them the specific house that they wrote the offer on and closed on?
Yeah, there's a very specific term, and it's procuring cause of the sale. So if you show a client a house 3 times, but they write an offer on that same home with another agent, theoretically, you're not the procuring cause of that sale, which is gut-wrenching as an agent.
Is there a big gray area there? Because
there is a big gray area.
It seems like it's up for interpretation.
Yeah. With the buyer's broker agreements now, it allows us to list the communities and it allows us to list the properties. So theoretically, every time I go tour a client, I can say, hey, if you buy one of these 7 houses that we looked at today, whether with me or with someone else, you're going to pay me. Right. So that's the good thing for the agent. It protects us. Sometimes you have clients that you work with for 3-4 years, they ghost you and then they come back and they'll contact another agent. It's rare, but it happens, or something pops up and it's a FSBO and they buy it, right? And so you don't get compensated if you've done all that work. So you can get very specific with the buyer broker agreements, even if it's non-exclusive, or you can have it be exclusive. They can only work with you if they buy a house in Incline for the next year.
Right.
So there are pros and cons for both the agent and the consumer. The goal of it originally, I believe, was mostly about compensation.
I'm a recent buyer. This is real life. I'm
Congrats.
Thank you. And I'm at the belief that the buyer broker agreement is actually a great thing because it aligns incentives. As long as you do your due diligence up front, you find an agent that is going to be a pro. When I say be a pro, they're going to communicate well. They're going to do extreme amounts of work. Well, maybe not extreme. They're going to do.
They're going to slave only for you. Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to do great amounts of work to find you what you need. They're going to be responsive, right? It aligns incentives early on, and without this fear of the buyer going elsewhere, or me as the buyer going elsewhere, just because I'm not happy with whatever, right? It allows for that open line of communication it's like, hey, I signed this agreement. we're in this together. Like, I don't appreciate you doing this, or I want you to do this. Can we work on that? Yeah, sounds great. Instead of just saying one little thing going wrong and then me saying, oh, I'm going to go work with somebody else, and then it getting really messy really quickly. So I do think the transparency behind it, although it's not completely there or completely what it was intended for originally, I do think it is ultimately a better thing from the buyer's perspective. Now, I don't deal with it every day like you do.
Yeah.
So if you have a different take on it.
No, I agree. I think what it really pushed agents to do was step their game up as a buyer's agent.
And which should happen. That should always happen.
It added a competitive edge to being a buyer's agent, because it wasn't like someone just walked in your open house and they're like, well, I guess we'll work with you. I have gotten interviewed intensely to be someone's buyer's agent. So now, we used to just go in and do a listing presentation. We're all competing for the listing. Mm-hmm. Now we're competing for the buyers. And it's not just, oh, I ran into them at a bar. It is everything that you've just mentioned. It's, do they have my best interest? Do they know about development? I want to buy a fix and flip. Do they understand what I'm actually looking for? They're not going to send me, $4 million properties when I said I'm maxed out at 3, right? So everything that you just said, I second completely.
And you and I had an off-camera conversation before we started here about how we have high expectations of ourselves and the people we work with. And I do agree with that. I do think it's upping the game, and which consumers deserve. I think real estate agents and lenders have gotten a bad rap over the years of just being money-hungry salespeople that, and granted, most consumers, 90% of consumers have no idea the amount of work that goes into being an agent or a lender. Yeah. But I do think there were so many bad apples out there that gave the bad name that I think this has helped to weed that out quite a bit, which is a plus for everybody. So
I agree. It's another barrier to entry, if you will, of just being able to be a bad egg in the community. Right?
Correct. Yeah. So you had mentioned the Anywhere. Was it acquisition or merger?
Merger or acquisition.
So tell me a little bit about that. What is that?
So Compass is purchasing Anywhere, or I think it got approved by all boards on both sides. So Anywhere Real Estate has various companies underneath their umbrella, a lot of debt, but also, a lot of companies. So it's Sotheby's, it's Century 21,
so they're conglomerate.
Coldwell Banker. Yeah, it's
that
big
owns
conglomerate.
Multiple brands of real estate brokerages.
Exactly.
Okay.
So theoretically, with how the buyer's broker agreements work and clear cooperation and everything, so if you're with one company, we briefly mentioned kind of exclusive listings. So if you're with one company right now, you can market that pocket listing, if you will, within your company, right? Within Casa Tua, within Remax, within Coldwell Banker. Mm-hmm. Well, when you have this big conglomerate of companies, the lines kind of get blurred, where if you're all owned by the same primary company and you're a subsidiary, can Coldwell Banker and Sotheby's and Compass and all these other companies have their own exclusive off-market listings and have their own MLS. So I think it's going to take, the companies that are outside of that either to come up with a solution for it or new regulations through boards and NAR and things. Or I think what we're going to see is more consumers saying, hey, I really like you, Sabrina. I like that you're independent. We have a relationship with you. We know your work here, but we also want access to these other listings that potentially we're not going to get access to unless we also sign a non-exclusive buyer broker agreement with a Sotheby's agent, right? Or a Compass agent. So I think you're going to see consumers having multiple representations non-exclusively.
Do you think Compass will roll out a subscription model where you, as Casa Tua, Sabrina Belleci, can have access to their or some sort of model where you pay for access?
I don't think
it's sorry to cut you off.
No, it's a good
question. It seems like a very big play to combat Zillow. Zillow's it's even though Zillow's not a real estate brokerage, which they're not, right? Correct me on that. Okay.
For now.
Zillow owns the lead acquisition.
Yeah.
And they make you pay as an agent to get access to their consumers.
Correct.
And so essentially, it's this exact same thing. It's multiple different brokerages coming under one technology to then funnel leads through.
Yeah, well, if we really wanted to get into the thick of that, there's a huge fight between Compass, NAR, and Zillow. And because Compass was doing the exclusive, Zillow basically was like, we're not going to syndicate your other listings, right? And Compass said, well, joke's on you. I'm going to buy the majority of the real estate market,
Right.
or the industry. And so now you're going to be forced to work with us.
And that's why I said it seems like a counterpunch.
Correct.
Yeah.
It is, but I don't think they're going to, like the little guys are the independent brokerages, right? I don't think Compass is going to charge the other agents a subscription. They're basically going to say, you need to join us.
Join us or...
Right. Or yeah. But I think as a consumer, I think Compass might come up with some kind of subscription based, just like the consumer is on Zillow. They're going to say, okay, well, if you also need to subscribe to us. And I think it's going to be another profit center for Compass and all these other companies.
They can either sell ads or sell subscriptions or sell...
Yeah, which theoretically it'll be hidden as like a buyer's broker rep, right? They'll tie that into like you're subscribing. So you're basically saying you're going to work with us. And now you have access to all of our exclusives.
Yeah.
It's a prediction, but we'll see.
Okay. That's interesting. That's a little bit off, a little bit on a tangent. So circling back to the buyer broker agreement, when is the right time during the transaction to introduce it? Because the whole goal is to create trust and not pressure, right? You want to work in alignment with clients. Do you have a specific moment during the transaction in which you say, hey, this is the right time?
I mean, theoretically, I always like to present it when I'm presenting my duties owed form to a buyer, right? Saying, hey, I'm a fiduciary. This is my, my promises to you. I think legally we're supposed to present it before we actually go out and tour properties.
Which would be smart.
It's smart, right? I always like to have a sit-down consultation with a buyer. And at the end of the agreement, I said, hey, or at the end of the meeting, I'm always like, here's my agreement if you want to work with me before we go out and tour properties. Okay. At first, we had a lot of objection to that from buyers, prospective buyers, because...
Probably when it was new.
When it was new, right? Because it wasn't in practice. It wasn't common practice. And the consumer was very like, what do you mean I need to sign something, right? So a lot of people would then go to listing agents to just see a specific house. I think now it's more common, and I think the buyers are learning to really interview and take time to get to know you as an agent, which is in their best interest.
That is
right?
great.
Make sure that you know the market that they're interested in, right? I always like to present it after the first consultation. So we're a resort market. A lot of times that consultation happens on a Zoom meeting or on a phone call, and then it's a follow-up email. Rarely, but I'd say it's becoming more often now. I'll get a call from a buyer who wants to see one of my listings. And so I'm already representing the seller. I don't need to present them with the contract for a buyer's broker agreement. But during our bonding and discussion, while they're touring my listing is typically when they'll say, oh, like, we like you. We want to work with you too. We also want to look at all these other properties. So then I would present it then before really you do your full tour of getting to know the area and looking at other homes.
That makes sense. Because I've seen some agents that just lob it over and don't mention it and just kind of like, hey, there's this thing you need to sign, all the way to, hey, let's talk about this. Here's how I'm adding value to get to this number. What are your thoughts? That kind of thing. So,
well, I've had buyers tell me, well, why do I need to sign this? So-and-so is showing me houses and I didn't sign anything, right? And that's like, we can get in a lot of trouble as professionals. We have to get that document signed.
Yep, that makes sense. So what do buyers gain both fiduciarily and protection-wise once a buyer-broker agreement is in place? And what risks exist without one?
I mean, I feel like the risks are more so to the realtor, actually, by not getting one signed.
So is it really actually good for the consumer?
It's good for the consumer because they feel like they really someone's on their team. And also it says, okay, here's my expectation of costs. Whether the seller is going to pay it or I'm paying it theoretically, I'm the one that's giving the seller my money for their house. So it's all coming out in the wash. Mm-hmm. But I think the risks really are to the agent more so than the consumer, and the benefits, I guess, to the consumer is that you have someone that's on your team. And a risk to the consumer, I guess, is if you lock in with an agent and you get down the path of touring homes and they're not listening to you or they're not negotiating to your standards and you're locked into a contract, right? And you want to go work with someone else, you have to negotiate basically your way out of that contract, depending on which form it is. But
yeah. So it seems like it actually makes it a little bit tough on the consumer?
I think it's tougher for the consumer. That's my opinion. But I think what it did was, again, like gives the consumer awareness of, oh, maybe I should be interviewing the person that's going to help me purchase this huge asset, right? Maybe the most expensive thing I'll ever own. And also, once a buyer signs on with us, they get access to our full database, our full vendor list, right? Our lenders, our title people, my flooring guy, my window guy. Like I've worked with these people for 13 plus years in town and I vetted all of them, right? I know versus them just kind of going on Craigslist or Angie's List and saying, okay, who's the best contractor? Who's the best tile guy, right? So that is a benefit to the consumer is like once you've really committed to an agent that's local and that's been in the market, like you get access to everything they've already pre-vetted for you.
Being a lender in a local market, I can appreciate that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So yeah, that's great information to know. Let's talk about now the pros and cons of a buyer working directly with the listing agent. So you've been a listing agent, numerous listings over the years, 250 million in sales. You've had plenty of listings. What are the pros and cons of somebody working directly with a listing agent as a buyer?
A great question. Real estate, like I said, is a relationship business. And so, really being able to trust your agent on if you're a buyer or a seller is always top of mind. And so the consumer, the buyer always thinks that if they work with a listing agent to buy the house, they're theoretically going to get a better deal. Right. They're like, okay, I'm just going to have you represent both. I think it comes down to incentives. The listing agent obviously wants to get the deal done. And I think the listing agent is incentivized if they're representing both sides to actually make a deal happen. Mm-hmm. When you represent both buyer and seller, you kind of become a mediator. And in my office, at least, we try not to do that. Dual rep, just because it can get messy if the buyer and the seller are not getting along, or if they're heavy negotiators or stern negotiators. And so for us, when we have all of our clients are wonderful, and we just basically become the holder of information that we let both parties know at the same time, right? And we become more transparent with permission from our seller as a listing agent. If we're going to represent the buyer, the seller will basically guide us, here's my bottom line, which they theoretically always tell us. And it's up to the seller whether we can actually disclose that to the buyer once we're representing both sides. And then the buyer, theoretically will ask for a discount on that buyer's broker agreement commission rate. And so they feel like they're going to get that off the top or they're going to be able to get something else. So it really depends on the situation. It depends on the property. It depends on the client. So pros for the listing agent, obviously, is you get to keep that house in your inventory, as I like to call it. So when I have a listing and I sell it to one of my buyer clients, I'm stoked because theoretically, in the next 3 to 10 years, when my client trades up or trades down or wants to sell, I now have that listing that I've already sold in my inventory again, which is great. Also, I get to, for the most part, be very transparent with the buyer. And I always tell the sellers this, hey, what is a fair price to you? And just tell them that. It's less haggling, I would say, when you're representing both sides.
Really?
I think so. I've had buyers that I've picked up from another agent, years later, and they said, well, we bought it from the listing agent and we felt like we overpaid because the listing agent wasn't transparent with us, right? Because their first relationship was with that seller. And so maybe that listing agent pushed harder for a higher price or what have you. Mm-hmm. So it really depends on the agent and it depends on the clients. I think that, having sat in so many open houses at our listings, we have homes that are empty for a lot of the years. But if I noticed, this window's not working or this door needs to get fixed or what have you, and it could have been something that the seller didn't disclose, maybe just because they forgot. They haven't been in the house for 2 years, right? So the buyer, as a benefit, might get a better deal on the house, right? Have, less of a hard time negotiating, but also just learn more about the property because the listing agent has most likely spent a lot of time in that home,
that makes
right?
That makes sense.
We know that the driveway is going to ice up around noon,
Yeah.
right? All the things.
Okay. So it sounds like actually it makes negotiations a little bit easier.
I think so. For me and my team in practice, yes. We always like to, if I have a listing and I have a buyer client that comes in my team, I always hand it to a team member. There's still transparency. There's still, we still disclose as much as possible and try to be, fair in dealing in negotiations. But I like to have some kind of buffer. So even if you're going to go with the listing team agent, I like to have some kind of buffer because inevitably every person's different, every house is different, every negotiation can be different.
Mm-hmm.
And so if a buyer is coming in and they want to be represented by the listing team, typically it's because they want a good deal, and they're going to fight for it. And it's always nice to have a person solely representing you. So I personally don't love dual rep, even if it's within the same team. Can I tell a horror story?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the best.
I have a client who I love. They bought a big, beautiful home in town and very expensive home. That home was previously listed for, I think it was around 10 or 12 million. And then it was often on the market for 3 years. It was put back on the market with a different team, and that team listed it for around like 18 million. Well, that buyer came in during the pandemic when things were a little bit crazy, but that home is a very expensive home. Not everyone could just buy that house, and that buyer came in and bought it full price. And they found out later that it was on the market for 6 million less months before they bought it. They're very upset. It was not disclosed.
And that was a dual representation.
It was a dual representation. So that listing agent felt that they had more of incentives, right? Higher the sale price, higher the commission. That team that represented this buyer did not disclose to him, here's the history of the property. And the guy is the CEO. He runs, tons of companies. He doesn't have time to sit on Zillow and look at the history of a property. He trusted the listing team. So that to me is a horror story. Like that client will never work with that agent again. And it's not good for anyone that's involved.
So was the property really worth 18 million?
Well, it's only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, now, sure, right? Land here is very expensive. It's a beautiful house, and they have since put millions of dollars into the property, making it theirs. On a resale, are they going to get their money out of it? Probably not. But they know that now. But they're very, so that's why I'm like, it's not always to the benefit of the buyer to work with the listing agent. You really have to do your due diligence, even if you're going to work with a listing agent, to really interview them and make sure that they have your best interest at heart.
Is there more load on the buyer to do the due diligence at that point if you're in a dual representation? Because as a listing agent, and this is no knock on any listing agent at all. It's just you're kind of stuck in the middle between two people. One wants one thing, one wants the other. You can only say so much, and you have to be extremely careful because you can't over disclose on either side.
Correct.
And so I do feel like that would cause a case where the buyer would have to have much more due diligence, which is tough as a buyer, especially if you're in a market that you're not familiar with, or you're not a real estate agent as a buyer. Most buyers. Not real estate agents.
We buy houses too, but you don't know what you don't know as the consumer and as the buyer. And so you're trusting the listing team. It also gets hairy when you get into multiple offer situations. And for all I know, that buyer could have been shown the previous history of that listing multiple times and he just forgot, right? So I'm taking him at his word. But when you get into multiple offer situations, I've had friends who were buying a house and it was a multiple offer situation. And they came to me and said, hey, we are going to have to work with the listing agent if we want to buy this house. And of course, it was a blow to me because I'd been working with them. But they were like, we want this house. We're going to work with the listing agent. And the listing agent had an incentive to dual rep. Right. So I released them from their buyer's broker. They worked with the listing agent and they got the house. So they ended up tearing down most of the house because things weren't disclosed and it was an older house. But they got the house that they wanted. And so as an agent, you have relationships with these people and what's the best interest of that client, and then if you look at our listing agreements, for example, as a listing agent, we have in our specific contract here in Northern Nevada and Incline, there is a clause in there that says, Mr. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, are you going to allow your agent to disclose if there are multiple offers? Are you going to allow them to disclose price and terms, right? The seller gets to decide. So if you're representing both, you're automatically, if the seller said, no, you can't disclose any of that, you're automatically, I would say you're automatically in a bind because you have a knowledge that you have to withhold from now your buyer client.
Right.
Right. And they're like, well, what if I give them more money? Like, what are you supposed to do? Sit there and be hotter, colder? It's like, so I just think that dual rep, some states don't allow dual rep. Nevada.
That would get messy quick.
It gets messy
If
quick.
you know stuff that if you were representing solely the buyer that you would want to tell your buyer, if you're just the buyer agent. I mean, how does that work?
It's very messy to navigate, especially if, let's say by happen chance, you get a listing, you get a buyer, and that buyer wants to buy your listing, but you have two other buyers with other agents that have already written on that property. You have to be very, very, very careful because, everything that you say and do, you have to give every buyer's agent and every buyer the same information. So just because he's your client, if you on a whim say, hey, we have, 3 offers and they're all at this price, you need to tell every other buyer that same information. Otherwise you can get in a lot of trouble, right? So full transparency. So that's why in my office, we just don't do it.
Yeah.
We just have
That makes sense.
person rep.
It looks like it get messy quick. So as good as it might seem from the outside for a buyer, there can be misaligned incentives. There can be non-disclosure of important information. There can be other things that we've discussed just now that can make it a really difficult transaction and ultimately homeownership process for a buyer. So,
and for a seller, right? If you accidentally disclose the seller's bottom line to your own client, the seller's going to be pretty upset.
yeah, that's true. So would you say, to wrap it all up and put a bow on it, just don't go with the listing agent as a buyer?
I would call the listing agent. I would ask for all the info. I would do due diligence on that agent. And if you like them and you want to work with them, like maybe if they have a team member or someone in their office that can represent you, so that you still maintain the relationship maybe with the listing agent because you like them and you want to work with them. But I would avoid working with a singular agent as a dual rep agent.
Sounds good. Sabrina, what do you do personally to put your own touch on working with clients? What do you do differently that they can find value in?
I'm very opinionated and I'm not very quiet about my opinion. And I think my clients really appreciate that. I will walk into a house and I will tell my clients every reason why they should not buy that house. North facing driveway, sheet of ice in the winter, no sun, you're above Mount Rose Highway, you're going to have road noise, right? Like I'll tell them all the things. And at the end of the day, if they still want to buy the house, great. My clients and the opposite, right? Like I love a good project. And so I'm always excited about the house that no one else is looking at because it needs $1 million in renovations. So I always get my clients excited about that because I'm like, look at all the equity you can get right away, even if you just paint and do flooring. So I think my touch is honesty and transparency, really. And my clients appreciate that. Like I've talked to several clients out of buying houses that they fell in love with. And later on, they're like, oh, we're so happy we didn't buy that house. And then really, like, I think people get overwhelmed with a lot of the houses here are older. And so I think people get overwhelmed with the work that needs to be done on houses up here, even if they're 2 million plus. And so I have my own history of kind of renovating and flipping homes. And so I have a huge vendor list and contractor list.
How many homes have you bought and sold over the years?
In Incline specifically? Oh God, overall, I don't know, maybe 20.
So yeah, you have an extensive history of buying, fixing, selling.
Yeah. Flipping, living, yeah.
You've seen all the investment side of it.
Exactly. And I see how it helps people build wealth. It's a great resource. And, for me, I get really excited and I'm also very involved in the community. So if you move here in winter, it's a little bit harder, especially if you're a single guy or a single gal and you're trying to like make friends and, let's say you don't ski or snowboard, God forbid, right?
Yeah.
you move here during winter, you're like, oh, it can be kind of isolating. People get cabin fever. But I'm the one that's like, go to the rec center, go to all the Chickadee Ridge hikes, right? I try to really incorporate them into the community and then guide them to be good stewards of our environment and the community. And I think that's what you need when you're relocating, when you're buying into a community like Incline.
Yeah, certainly. Where can people find you?
Many places. So our social media handles it's at Inside Incline Village. People can find us and find me at Inside Incline Village. That's on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, and then our website. We do a weekly market update and community update. It's insideincline.com. Very focused on Incline Village and Crystal Bay, but we also, geographically do most of northern Nevada and also the lake on the California side too.
Yeah, certainly. And do you want to provide your email or phone number, or just go to insideincline.com?
Yeah, insideincline.com or at Inside Incline Village on social channels, and myself or one of my team members respond right away.
Awesome. Well, thank you for all the great information. You're a true pro. I appreciate it. We'll have to do this again soon and dive deeper into
good convo.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sabrina.